Good afternoon, everyone. This is Olivia Marquez with the NCCMT, and I'm the coordinator for the Spotlight webinar series brought to you by the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools. Thank you to those who have joined us this afternoon for the Spotlight webinar series. Today, we will be featuring the Getting to Outcomes model. So we have just a few housekeeping items to review before we get started today. Please see the chat section on the bottom right-hand side of your screen in WebEx. Please post any questions or comments that you might have during the webinar in this section. We'll have a designated open Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but you can feel free to share or post any questions or comments that you might have during the webinar, and we'll answer those at the end of the session. For those of you who may have any issues connecting, we ask that you join through a wired internet connection as opposed to wireless. And if you have any connection issues, you can use the WebEx 24/7 helpline, which is posted on this slide here. And this will also be shared for you in the chat section. We have a research assistant, Grace, who is available to assist with any technical issues you might have. So feel free to send a message to Grace through the chat section. We'll have, after today, the PowerPoint presentation will be made available in English and French. The English audio recording will also be made available on the NCCMT's website. These resources and links can be accessed through the chat section in WebEx. And we'll have these posted within a couple weeks of the presentation. So we have our first polling question today. We just want to get a sense of the audience that's joining us. So we're wondering how many people are watching or listening to today's session with you. So you can indicate if it's just yourself, if there's 1 or 3, 4 to 5, 6 to 10, or if you're with a larger group. So as you answer your questions, just select an option and then make sure to click Submit at the bottom of your screen. So thank you to those who have started to respond. We see that most people are joining themselves, and we have a few people who are joining with additional people, which is really great to see. So thank you to those who are responding. So we'd like to officially welcome everyone to the NCCMT Spotlight on Methods and Tools webinar series. We'll be posting links to the registry page for this tool, and we'll also have links to the website in the chat section as we move along through the presentation. So today's webinar will include a presentation by the developers of the tool themselves, and as well as a user story, so someone who's actually used the tool or model in their practice, so we can hear their perspective. So for those of you who may be unfamiliar with the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools, we're one of 6 national collaborating centers across Canada funded by the Public Health Agency of Canada. We here at the NCCMT are located at McMaster University in Hamilton, while the other NCCs focus on the use of research evidence in specific public health content areas. We here focus on improving the access to and use of methods and tools for health professionals in practice within Canada. So we're not content specific, but we offer methods and tools that can be applied across different areas of public health. NCCMT has many products and services available through our website. These are just a few of the products and services that we offer here on the slide. So many of you may be familiar with some of these that are up here already. And today we will be highlighting a tool that's actually located in our registry of methods and tools. And note that the NCCMT also offers a variety of other online learning opportunities through our online learning center. We also have a host of other multimedia tools for you to use. So we encourage you to check out the website after the session today. So we have our second polling question of today, and we're wondering how many of you are familiar with the method or tool that we're discussing. So a few of you may not be familiar, or you have heard of it, or perhaps you've actually even used it previously. So again, just remember to select an option and then click Submit at the bottom of your screen. So we see we have about 45% of respondents who are saying that they're not familiar with the tool, and about 16% who are saying that they've at least heard of the method or tool before. So really great to see, and it'll be exciting for our presenters today to be able to enlighten and give some more information on this. So I'd like to formally introduce both of our presenters today. So first speaking will be Matthew Chinman. And Matthew is a senior behavioral scientist at the RAND Corporation, where his focus has been on developing strategies to enhance the prevention capacity of community-based prevention practitioners. He's co-developed the Getting to Outcome models and led the development and testing of several Getting to Outcome-based guides that are aimed at assisting local communities in planning, implementing, and evaluating prevention programs in the areas of substance abuse prevention, underage drinking, teen pregnancy, homelessness, and youth development. So we're really excited to have him present for us today. And after Matthew, we're actually going to lead right into a presentation by Jamie Keith. So I'll just give a brief introduction to Jamie as well right now. And Jamie Keith is the Executive Director of the Alabama Campaign to Prevent Teen Pregnancy. So we're really excited to have her provide a little bit more information about how she's actually used Getting to Outcomes in her practice. So we are honored and excited to have both of our presenters today. So without further ado, I'll pass it on to Matthew.
Hi, can everyone hear me?
Yep, audio is great.
All right, thank you so much. Well, it's a pleasure to be here today to talk about Getting to Outcomes, and we're big fans of the National Collaborating Center for Methods and Tools. It's a great resource for people looking to do evidence-based work, and that's what we're all about. So, so today I'm just going to give a very sort of a brief 20-minute overview of Getting to Outcomes and some theories behind it, a little bit of research that's been done on it and how it works. And then Jamie is actually going to talk about how she's used it as a technical assistance provider, which is a key aspect of the Getting to Outcomes model that I'll tell you about, and talk about sort of her experiences in a project that we did together. All right, let's see. Okay. So the background for Getting to Outcomes, EBPs are evidence-based programs or practices. I think you've probably been to a lot of these presentations where there's always a slide that's like this. Pick a field, any field, and it seems like there are evidence-based practices that are not getting used or not getting equally applied across groups, at least, whether it's nursing, drug prevention, or health disparities. There is this huge problem in sort of the health world that there's all this effort has been made to research evidence-based practices. It takes millions of dollars and time and effort to try to figure out what works. But then the real world doesn't actually use any of those practices, or it could take years and years for those practices to finally get used, and that's a big problem. We put a lot of time and effort into this, and so we want people to actually get the benefit of these practices. So that is the context in which we created Getting to Outcomes, is the idea that I'm trying to move the slides forward here. Oh, there we go. So that some of the problems that get in the way of these evidence-based practices being used is what's shown at the bottom here, is that implementation activities often get neglected, and the practitioners who are charged with putting these practices into place often lack capacity or the knowledge and skills to conduct these evidence-based practices with quality. So Getting to Outcomes is a model and also a series of implementation supports that attempt to build capacity among these practitioners so they can use these evidence-based practices well. All right, so getting to outcomes as a model. When we created Getting to Outcomes back in 1999, the last millennia, we looked at the literature, talked to tons of stakeholders, and really settled on these 10 key steps that are really very generic in that they can be applied to any program, right? So for starting with doing a needs assessment, what problem do you need to focus on? Then identifying goals based on the problems that you've identified. Finding best practices worth copying and in implementing. Then seeing if those best practices fit within your community, within your organization. Assessing whether you have the capacity to take up these practices that you've identified. Making a concrete plan. Then doing the programs, and then doing a process evaluation, sort of checking the implementation, how did it go, evaluating the outcomes, did the participants of your program change, then based on all that, doing continuous quality improvement. It's likely you're going to run the program many times, how can we make it better, and then if the program is successful, how can we sustain it? So we identified that these are the 10 key steps that any program should go through. And we didn't invent all this, but we tried to come up with guidance to support community providers to walk through these steps in a high-quality way. And we do that through three main components. First, written manuals, and I'll show you some pictures of that in a second. We have come up with manuals across a wide variety of content domains in which we provide written guidance and tools, and I'll show you what one of those looks like, to guide people through each of those 10 steps. But we know that manuals are not enough. I mean, no one has, for example, learned to drive a car by just reading a book. And so then we also supplement that with training, and this is, classic training that you bring people together, we walk them through the manual, and they get to learn the language, we do role plays, all the kind of typical things that you do in training. But then what we've seen is that manuals and training by themselves is not enough. And then we add to that technical assistance, or TA. And this is where we send people to a site and really sit down with them step by step and kind of together walk through all the steps using the manual and all the tools to try to help sites, apply GTO to their programs that they want to do. So these are the three main components. There's been an effort in the implementation science world, of which GTO is sort of rooted in, is to kind of get the language standardized. So we wanted to also talk about what we do in GTO based on that language, and that effort was called ERIC, or Expert Recommendations for Implementing Change. And so what we do is we train and educate stakeholders, provide technical assistance. A big part of GTO is getting going multiple evaluative and iterative strategies. So we really try to get evaluation quality improvement going. And then a really very important part of the technical assistance is really helping sites to adapt and tailor the programs they've chosen to their own context. Usually when you get an evidence-based program, it sort of comes in a box, and the box has very standardized things, often what we have seen, communities don't even know what comes in the box, and they don't know how to use what's in the box. And so the idea is we try to work with them to take that program and really make it work for their own setting, and then we provide a lot of support for practitioners in doing that. We also secondarily try to improve and work with stakeholder relationships. Organizations that we work with often have, say, advisory boards or board of directors kind of a thing, and so we want to make sure that those relationships are good, so we do provide some support around that. Sometimes we get involved in the organizations to move infrastructure around to try to make it more friendly for implementation. What we do not do is usually offer financial strategies, and we tend not to work directly with the participants of these programs, but we pretty much work with the staff. So these are sort of in a nutshell the specific implementation strategies GTO employs to build capacity in order to move people through all these steps. All right, so I mentioned that we have many manuals, and so we started in 2004, I believe, yes, with drug prevention. So we applied all the guidance and tools of those 10 steps to helping people who were engaging in substance abuse prevention programs. Then from there, we went on to preventing underage drinking using sort of an environmental strategy approach. These are things like changing policies and laws. So we applied the GTO approach to that. From there, we went on to something called developmental assets, which is an approach, kind of a positive youth development approach, trying to give kids certain experiences and supports to help them thrive. So we teamed up with something called the Search Institute, who kind of spearheads the promotion of developmental assets nationally, and we applied our model to that developmental assets in that book. Then we went on to homeless services in the VA, which the Department of Veteran Affairs in the United States, homelessness among that population has been a big concern for a number of years, and so the Department of Veteran Affairs, we work with them to come up with a guide specifically for that population. Then the project that Jamie and I worked on together was a teen pregnancy prevention project, and so we came up with a guide specifically around how to do teen pregnancy prevention work. And then most recently, we applied the model to community emergency preparedness. So this is making sure that you as a citizen are ready to face any kind of an emergency. And there are sort of, some good practices that people can, and trainings to support those practices that public health departments, they can run. So we came up with a guide for that approach as well. So you can see there are a number of guides, and what we do is the guidance is similar, but the content changes. And so there are some key things that have to change in all these guides in terms of the measures that we use and the evidence base that is tapped into. So, so some of it changes and some of it stays the same from guide to guide to guide. So since this is sort of a tool, so a center for methods and tools, I wanted to talk a little bit more about tools, and that GTO has many tools. And here is a list by each of the chapters, and each chapter corresponds to each of the 10 GTO steps. So we use tools, which are essentially worksheets. They are worksheets that have prompts, and the prompts get providers to think about certain issues they need to decide about in a way to plan and evaluate a program. And so we have tools to help people think about doing a resource assessment and a needs assessment and what data they're going to catalog and how to do priorities between all their different needs. We have a logic model tool, logic models being sort of a graphical representation of your program. We have tools to help you develop outcomes statements, to check for, to sort of do a checklist on certain programs that you're considering in terms of how evidence-based they are, whether potential programs you're considering are a good fit, or whether you have capacity to do them. We have just some basic planning tools around budgets and work plans. We tools around a process evaluation planner and summary tool, and an outcome evaluation planner and summary tool. And then we have a big tool that prompts people to do continuous quality improvement and then tools for sustainability. So I'll give you an example. So this is what we called our sort of goals or desired outcomes tool. We use the SMART approach, which you may have heard. Sort of, it just prompts you to think about these desired outcome statements to make sure that they're specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and I'm forgetting, time-bound. And so and then in this tool, we have a variety of different kinds of domains that are important. This is from the Teen Pregnancy Prevention Manual. So it's just a way to get you to think about, are your desired outcomes in one of these categories that in the United States is important because one of the funders of Teen Pregnancy Prevention Program has said that these outcomes are really important. So as you can see, these tools, they prompt decision, planning, and also record keeping. So they're a way for people to record the product of their decisions, and so they can have it and keep it. And so not only, do we have manuals that are paper, but we also have people in projects also get Word versions of this so they can, update them and change them and save them and send them to other people. And then the other piece that this is important for is that these tools then become the way that technical assistance can be provided. So the technical assistance is really designed to be an iterative feedback system. So if you're a site and you're starting to do some work on a program and you say you're filling out this tool that we're looking at, you can fill it out and then send it to your TA provider, who then gets it and says, oh, okay, this looks good, but what about this and what about this, and can send some feedback back to you based on that. And then you can iterate in that way until everyone feels that this tool is completed in a high quality way. And in our GTO process, we do that with all the tools. So the tools become sort of the nexus of quality assurance work in a sense, and also decision making. So here's an example of our work plan tool. It goes on for a couple of slides. I'm not going to go over all of it, but what we do is we try to give people some specific information about different tasks that they should consider in running any kind of program. Preparing a budget, thinking about recruitment, designating staff as a facilitator, and then in this tool we actually give some information about how ahead of implementation you should maybe think about some of these things, say 6 months prior to implementation, 4 months prior to implementation. It's just a guide. And then these boxes here are blank and to be filled in by the site as they go through the process. So here's just more of the work plan tool. Okay, and so this is a slide that talks about our iterative training and TA process that I was describing a little earlier. So this is our teen pregnancy prevention or project, and we've also done it in our more recent drug prevention project, where we do some initial training on GTO along with training in an evidence-based practice. Then the TA staff work with the sites on setting up goals. Then we do more training on the later steps of GTO. Then the TA staff work with the sites around fit, capacity, and planning tools, again in that iterative fashion that I mentioned. Then the sites start implementing their evidence-based program. We work with them to collect fidelity and outcome data. We then go to the evaluation and quality improvement portions of GTO, train them on that, and then as part of that training, give them feedback reports that summarize the fidelity and outcome data. And then as together, TA and sites work to come up with an improvement plan, essentially, to then implement the second cycle of their evidence-based program, but using, the benefit of that quality improvement. And then at the end of that cycle, we then start talking to them about sustainability. So over, we've done a number of these projects, and we've gotten kind of more efficient over time. And our last project, each site in the project got 26 hours of technical assistance over 2 years. So it's not that much. I mean, it's doable, say, for, sort of a federal funder to set up a system like this, because if you're really targeted, you can do it for not that much hours of technical assistance support. So just a bit on research. We've done a number of studies, and we sort of think about it in 2 categories, the early studies and the later studies. In the early studies, the folks that we worked with were community coalitions and their programs. Coalitions are groups that come together, disparate groups that come together from various sectors of the community, say sort of religion, health, education, law enforcement, all coming together to try to solve a problem. And the programs that they brought with them widely varied in type and quality, and some of the design in some of these studies, some were randomized, some were quasi-experimental. This flow of GTO was done in sort of a non-prescriptive manner. So we basically arrived, these coalitions had their programs, and we just tried, and we, to say, okay, of all these 10 steps, where would you like to jump in? Because we feel like you can really jump in at any point and kind of make your programs better. So it was non-prescriptive. Our key measures, because we couldn't really collect data on fidelity or outcomes because the programs were all different. So we had a measure of what we call GTO performance, or how good were programs and their organizations at performing each of the steps of GTO, so goal setting, evaluation, planning. And our key finding was basically that programs assigned to GTO had better performance on those ratings than the programs that did not get GTO. And what we also noticed is that when we gave people sort of an open-ended choice about where to jump into GTO, it was mostly around evaluation, because they had their programs, but they hadn't done a lot of evaluation, and they really liked the evaluation assistance that was offered through GTO, even though GTO does a lot more than that. But so the later studies, and the one that Jamie and I were involved in, involved boys and girls clubs. And I don't know if folks know about boys and girls clubs, but they're basically small nonprofits in the United States that are after-school locations for kids, for middle schoolers a lot of the times, to go and have a safe place to go, do some recreation, and they do some programming. And so, but they don't really do a lot of evidence-based programming. So it seemed like a nice spot to try to see if we could activate them to do some evidence-based programs. The idea was that we were gonna just pick one evidence-based program, one per study, and then the design was that we were gonna work with a whole bunch of these sites all at once. They all got trained in a certain evidence-based program, and then half of them got GTO assistance on top. The flow was much more systematic than the early studies. We started at step 1 and kind of went through them systematically, as I sort of laid out in that previous slide, filling out all the tools and very systematically. And because each study focused on only one program, we were able to collect fidelity data through outside of, unbiased observations, and we were able to collect youth outcomes. And the key findings from those studies was that basically programs that or sites that had assistance from GTO had better fidelity and had better outcomes. So we were very happy with the results of those studies. So here's just a typical result that we found this is a chart of adherence to the activities in an evidence-based program, and this was from the Teen Pregnancy Project. So, and the program that all the sites were doing was called Making Proud Choices, or MPC. So you have MPC by itself, sites that were just running that program by themselves, compared to sites that were running that same program but with GTO assistance. And you could see by the second year, the blue represents the percent of activities rated by our outside observers in completely or in full. And you can see about half the activities of the sites that were not using GTO were only rated as having been done completely, versus almost all the activities from the sites using GTO were rated completely. So that's a huge change. So the sites getting GTO, almost had perfect fidelity, where the sites not using GTO had about half fidelity. So and this is typical of the kind of improvements that we saw in our studies. So this is where we were looking at some outcomes. So we had a combined measure of sort of the mediators of actual condom use, sort of your intentions about condoms, your beliefs about condoms, and you can see that although both groups were improving, the GTO group improved on this measure from baseline to post much more. So that is it. So for the brief overview of getting to outcomes, I wanted to point this out. At this website here, there is a ton of more information about the models. Most of our manuals are downloadable for free there. We have a list of all of our projects, all of our publications. We have a multimedia section where you can actually get a little bit of training on GTO. In one of our projects, we actually created a sort of an avatar-based training that kind of combines PowerPoint and audio with sort of cartoons speaking to you and sort of showing you things. The whole thing takes about an hour, a little over an hour to complete. So if you're interested in more stuff about GTO, you might want to check this out. Also, here's my email address, and you can feel free to contact me at any point about anything related to GTO. I'm always happy to talk to folks about that. So I think now we are going to go to Jamie Keith, who's going to talk about her time as a technical assistance provider in our project. And I think I am now supposed to move this over to her.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. And I also want to echo Matt's appreciation for the opportunity to spend time with you all this afternoon to talk about getting to outcomes, and more specifically for the role that me and my organization had on the project. And so how does the research really look when it comes to practice, and what are some of the things that we learned? So this is me. Happy to see you through this picture. So the way I structured the pieces of information that I wanted to talk to you all about today is to just kind of give some very broad overview of some lessons that we learned with this getting to outcomes process, specifically with the Boys and Girls Clubs project that Matt talked about earlier. One of the things we were really looking to try to do, and that we in fact did, and we're happy when that research proved that, was that we were very interested in finding a way to enhance and strengthen evidence-based interventions related to teen pregnancy, STI, and HIV prevention for young people who were participating in Boys and Girls Clubs activities. So traditionally, we would provide training on the intervention, and that's great, and then we would sort of turn folks' sleeves to go and implement those programs with the young people in their setting. And so by adding the GTO process to that intervention training, we were able to start building some structure and support to why those evidence-based programs are designed the way they are, and why it is important to make sure that every activity is done if you want to make sure that the young people benefit from that knowledge and skills development, and that they do demonstrate a change in knowledge, an increase in skills, and changes in behaviors and attitudes. So the bigger lessons, some of the larger ones that we learned in the GTO training and technical assistance process is that the simultaneous involvement of frontline staff and that's a key word, someone in the organization's leadership increased the effectiveness of GTO process. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes the people in an organization who are tasked with completing these GTO tools that Matt highlighted earlier and participating in the technical assistance are at the front line. And in the Boys and Girls Club's example, they were the program delivery staff. They were the folks in the club meeting the young people every day and delivering programs for those young people. And so to overlay on that primary responsibility the task of completing these GTO tools, that's a big step. And what we found was for those clubs that leadership was very actively engaged and interested in the process, that the frontline staff felt more empowered to participate, and they felt like the things that they were discovering and the activities that they were recommending and the processes they were thinking about were more likely to be accepted and embraced, if you will, by the organization. And we had one example of a club whose club leadership attended the training on GTO and attended a good number of the technical assistance sessions, and that person also provided an opportunity for GTO to be presented to the organization's board of directors. So it was a very strong wraparound of support for GTO within that organization. The other thing that we learned is that sustainability of the GTO activities, and again, back to those tools, and when you do your process outcomes, your outcome evaluation, and go through that continuous quality improvement, you want to loop back around and revisit some steps and maybe tweak a few things along the way. Having that leadership engaged and regularly briefed ensured that sustainability was stronger. The other thing that I would like to sort of highlight from these lessons learned is that GTO does require dedicated time of frontline staff. So again, referencing the tools that Matt highlighted earlier, the completion of the tools is time-consuming and does require dedicated staff time. And one of the things we found in a Boys and Girls Club setting was that Boys and Girls Club staff show up about an hour before the young people do. And during that hour, they're trying to get the club ready. They might need to be meeting a bus, doing all sorts of different youth-related, welcoming types of activities. And so where does an administrative function like completing the GTO tools, where does that happen? Where is that going to fit in that staff person's workday? And so we needed to spend some time working on that. The other thing we found is that limited experience with program planning activities really does require a very deliberate and extensive GTO training and technical assistance time. So oftentimes we would find that the program delivery staff were fabulous with programs and fabulous with young people, but may not have had the opportunity to spend much time in program planning. And so that was a very strong indicator for why technical assistance was so important. And an example I have for that is I was visiting one of the clubs and providing technical assistance to that club leader, and the person was so appreciative of the fact that technical assistance accompanied the GTO process, because they were struggling on another project where they were required to fill out forms, do all sorts of documentation and all of these different things, but essentially were handed a manual and said, you know, these are due in 30 days, with no guidance, no training, no support, and it was very frustrating. And so they were contrasting and comparing that to what they were receiving for the GTO and how that helped them to be better at GTO, and they were telling me they were applying some of what they had learned from GTO to that other process that they were having to sort of struggle through. Other lessons, multiple factors, improve frontline. I called it buy-in because it was a bit different than the delivering programs for young people, playing basketball and doing health and nutrition, those sorts of things. This was, GTO was again an administrative function that some of them were having to do for the first time. So we were very deliberate about talking about how the GTO process would, number one, improve their implementation as a staff person and a youth-serving professional, so it would build their capacity to be more effective in their work, and that it would also improve the participant experience. So their young people participating in the program would have a more positive experience because GTO was going to lend some extra pieces of information, some extra depth to the facilitator's knowledge and effectiveness in reaching those young people. And I've already spoken about the organizational leadership and support of GTO in the previous slide. But the other thing about this multiple factors and the buy-in is that technical assistance and training, so the provider, the individual who would do that work, and the staff person that we work with, it becomes a very personal connection as well as a professional connection. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's not dry and, at least it shouldn't be, dry and matter of fact and straight to the point, that you make your appointment, you show up, you have a personal connection, and then that lends itself better to making that professional connection yield those positive results. And just as an example for that, I showed up at a club one day, and it was during spring break when there were a lot of young people in that club, and there was supposed to be lunch provided. Well, the person, the volunteer who was going to provide lunch wasn't there, and the person I was meeting with for technical assistance clearly was preoccupied and mentioned to me the problem, and so I said, well, let me help fix lunch. And they were happy to take me up on that, and I think because we had established a personal connection, they felt like I was sincere and I was willing to do it. So I could do that, and then we could get on with our professional work that we needed to do once that immediate problem was solved. So it is a personal and a professional connection that I think is important to highlight. And also, finally, linking process and outcome evaluation data to the experiences of program participants is also a motivating factor. So going through GTO in and of itself may seem, for a program delivery person, to be a lot of administrative work, but when you can link that work to the experience of program participants, in our case young people, those adults working on this GTO process were very motivated to participate and to make sure that they were doing the things that they needed to do. So finally, I just wanted to run through just a few examples, and there were many. This project was a 5-year project. I think we worked for 4 years within the clubs. Matt can correct me on that if I've misstated that. But so there were a number of examples that I could pull from, but I chose these, and I hope that they are reflective of some things that you all may see in your work. And so I'm just going to jump in with GTO Step 4, and that was the one Matt referenced earlier, sort of talking about fit. And so oftentimes in the work that I'm doing, I may hear someone say, oh, that teen pregnancy prevention program didn't work. But then my response has become, well, I would imagine that that program just didn't fit either with the population you're serving, with the time you're trying to serve, with the outcomes you were trying to achieve. So backing up from, let's just pick something and do it, to backing up and finding an intervention that fits with the organization's climate, their culture, the environment, the expectations of the community and the staff, to make sure that the things that you're doing or the program that you're implementing indeed fits with the population you're serving within the community that you work. And so fit was a very important opportunity for us to make sure that we were understanding what the communities needed. And one of the examples from that is that spending time talking to stakeholders, whether that be parents, well, it should be parents, young people, in the case of a nonprofit organization, perhaps the board of directors, to make sure that everyone's on board with the programming that you're going to do. And in our case, it was a sexual health education program, and so it was important to make sure that what the project and the program was going to address with young people fit with the expectation of those stakeholders. So the other thing I wanted to talk about for just a bit was capacity. And for this example, it's mainly understanding the ability of staff to embrace and effectively deliver the project, in our case, the sexual health education project. So we knew that Boys and Girls Club staff were very effective at working with young people, supporting young people, connecting with young people, because that's their role and that's what they do. What we wanted to build the capacity for and try to get some understanding of is what was their sort of comfort level, if you will, ability to talk about sexual health education with the young people that they serve. And so for us in this particular example, understanding capacity and then building the capacity of young people, of facilitators, program staff, to be able to address this subject with their kids in their clubs was really important, because if you deliver the program, deliver the intervention, but you can't talk about condoms, or you can't say things that maybe you haven't ever spoken aloud before, but now you're going to do it in front of a group of young people, you know, how do you build someone's capacity to do that? And so it was really important on this project in that sense of capacity to understand the staff's ability and willingness and comfort level in addressing this subject. And then I want to jump into GTO Step 6 planning. Matt showed that tool earlier, and while on the surface or on the face of it, it looks very, very involved, it is very involved, and it's very involved for a reason, because I think a lot of us say, oh, I plan to do X, Y, or Z, but when we really start writing down all the elements or all the components or all the steps, it may be a bit more exhaustive or extensive than we originally thought. And so deliberately identifying steps, processes, activities that ensure successful implementation of the project is really important. Particularly on this project with the Boys and Girls Clubs, we needed parental consent, so you have to get that out and get it back in time to be able to pre-test the young people who are participating. There were needs to identify logistical components. So you needed, for this project, you needed a laptop, you needed a way to run a DVD, you needed space in the club to have some privacy for this particular intervention to work. And so that GTO Step 6 planning was really important, just to make sure that all the steps were in place and that you had everything that you needed to be effective in delivering the intervention. One of the examples from that is we had one, generally speaking, folks thought, oh, we'll implement this intervention during the summer. There are a lot of young people here every day, all day long. We'll have plenty of young people to recruit from. We will not have any challenges at all delivering the intervention to the required number of young people and have them attend every session. Well, what we discovered, because we did a plan and we went back and evaluated it later, is that that was not necessarily true. Sure, there were a lot of young people there, but they weren't there every day because of vacations or spending time with a grandparent instead of being home. There were other opportunities within the club during the summer, field trips, other community-based organizations coming in wanting to spend time with youth. And so because of the plan and how deliberate it was set out, when it was revisited, we're able to make some adjustments and some tweaks. The other example from planning that I have is a club decided to do this intervention, which is 8 sessions on a Friday night and a Saturday. And initially it was like, that going to take a lot of planning because you have to plan for meals, you have to plan for volunteers, chaperones, you have to have all of your stuff ready to roll. And they implemented it, they followed their plan, and they had the highest retention, really strong outcome measures because they planned so effectively. And following the intervention, I was doing the CQI process with that club member, and she said to me, if I had not had that plan, it would have been a disaster. And so, again, we think we plan, but perhaps this more extensive planning tool can help us to identify things that we may not ordinarily think about. And then into process evaluation, thoughtfully designing the tools to capture processes and then to review that data to inform changes. That goes back to that example I had about implementing during the summer. Sounded like a great idea. Process evaluation uncovered that it wasn't such a great idea. Now, how do we change what we're doing to enhance the effectiveness of the project moving forward? In the absence of any process evaluation data, we would not have known how to adjust and why things weren't quite the way we thought they were. So that process evaluation data is important. Then outcome evaluation data, designing tools to capture outcome measures and review that data. We often heard from the Boys and Girls Clubs especially that they really needed to show outcome data, but they didn't necessarily know how to create an outcome evaluation tool. How do we deliver that? When do we deliver it? How do we assess what we discover? How do we report on that? And so the GTO process has that very well defined and laid out in an accompanying tool. And the technical assistance was there to help those practitioners or those folks who are on the front line, in our case, the Boys and Girls Clubs, begin to make the connection between what I'm doing, how I'm doing it, and how that impacts the outcomes and the knowledge that the young people gain. And then finally, that CQI step 9 is kind of embedded in the things that I was just talking about. So we do process evaluation, we do outcome evaluation. And now what are we going to do with it? We need to review it, we need to understand it, and then apply that and maybe hop back in at capacity and say, you know, we really need to be a little bit more deliberate in a condom demonstration for our staff so that they feel more comfortable with that activity. Or, again, back to planning. We can't put all of our intervention time in the summer because that's just not going to work. And no, we can't do it in the fall either because there's a lot of sports activities. So then when are we going to do it? What best fits within our organization for this implementation? And so that CQI was really very important to make sure that taking the data that we have and then looping back through GTO and making those tweaks that are necessary happen for the benefit of the young people or whoever is receiving the services for your specific project. So those are the examples that I have for sharing with you all today, and clearly there were many, many more, and I'm happy to answer any questions that may come up following this piece of our presentation. And I think that I am supposed to now hand the ball back to someone else. And I did. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was such a great overview of how you've utilized the model in practice, especially going through each of the steps. And thanks again to Matthew for providing such a great foundation for us to work with at first. So thank you very much to you both. We'll now open up the session to any questions or comments from our attendees. So we invite you to just post any questions that you have in the chat section at the bottom, and you can share those with Health Evidence, that's myself, the host, or with Grace, or we ideally would like you to share them with all participants. So you can post any questions that you have there. In the meantime, we just have a few other polling questions for those who are still in the session, and we're wondering, now that you've learned a little bit more about getting to outcomes, could this be a method or tool that's useful in practice for you? So again, just select an option, and then you can click Submit at the bottom. So in the meantime, while we have that polling question up, I think I just can maybe start us off, and I have one question for Matt, and I hope I can articulate this well, but just going back to the getting to outcomes model, one thing I noticed with step number 5, which is assessing capacity, so staff, financing, et cetera, to implement the program. I have a suspicion that this may cause a bit of a holdup for some people or be a barrier, particularly when it comes to resources and financing to actually implementing. So capacity can be a big issue for public health units here or any organization. So I'm just wondering if you have any advice or suggestions about what to do when organizations have sort of found programs that might be best practice for them or worth copying, and they've modified them, but they just don't have the capacity, and things either drop off the table completely or they cannot move forward because of these capacity issues that are interfering. So I'm wondering if you have any suggestions that people can do without compromising the effectiveness of a program or intervention.
Sure, I mean, that's a great question, and that really, you know, it sort of hits at the heart of a lot of the tough choices that organizations have to make. You know, there is no sort of magic answer. I mean, we say all the time that, you know, if you're adopting a program that has been tested in a certain way, you know, there are some things you can do to tweak the program, change it a little bit, tailor it to your own place. But, you know, if you don't have key capacities needed to really do it the way it was intended, then it might not be worth doing. And so, you know, is it better to kind of muddle through with a sort of challenged implementation that is probably not going to get outcomes because of the challenged implementation, or would it be better to just to think about doing another kind of program, scaling back ambitions to something more achievable? So I think that's, you know, and so in GTO that we talk about that a lot in terms of trying to think about, you know, where do you cross that line? Like, how much do you change a program until it stops becoming the program that you actually attracted to it in the first place? And so this was actually, you know, this is a role that technical assistance providers play, and you know, we can't in preparing a manual or even a website or, you know, training, you know, we can't sort of go through every single program in the world and sort of show people where that line is for every single program in the world. And so what we try to do is present general guidance on these issues, and then have a, you know, someone like Jamie, you know, who can then apply that guidance and then sort of adapt to what they're seeing, you know, site by site, and then give them the benefit of their experience using the GTO general approach. But it is a tough question, and there are sort of no easy answers there.
Right, that's great. Definitely some questions to think about in terms of balancing sort of the integrity or the intention of the program with the capacity of the organization. So some good questions, and especially things that public health can think about in the future going forward. In the meantime, so no questions that I see posted yet, but we do invite attendees to post anything in the chat section. And in the meantime, we're actually have a slide up here that includes a short survey. So your feedback is really important to us. Your comments and suggestions really help to shape and improve the webinars that we offer, and we're always open to suggestions about what our attendees like to see in the webinars and any methods or tools that they would actually like to see in the future. We definitely base that a lot off of attendee feedback. So we have the link to the survey posted in the chat section. And we're just wondering, we have another polling question here. What attendees are thinking about in terms of their next steps. So this, in this question, you can actually select as many options as you wish. So perhaps you're interested in accessing the method or tool that's referenced today, so the Getting to Outcomes model, reading the NC-CMT summary page about the method or tool that's been described. Perhaps you might consider using the method or tool in practice, or telling a colleague. So even if it's something that's not suitable for yourself or your role, it might be something suitable for a colleague. And then just inviting you to press submit at the bottom of the screen. All right, and we can just leave that up for a little bit longer. We also invite you to share your story. We're always interested in hearing how you have been using evidence-informed decision-making in your practice. We definitely want to hear about it, or if you've used some of the tools that are even featured in the webinar series, we'd love to hear. Likewise, if you have any, if you need any support for evidence-informed decision-making, please, we invite you to contact us. We try to respond within 24 business hours. Let's see, and we just have a little bit more information about our other webinar series. We have today was a webinar brought to you by the Spotlight on Methods and Tools, but we have other topic-specific methods and tools webinars, an online journal club, which is a small group of individuals who meet through the webinar format for a journal club, as well as peer-to-peer webinars. So we actually have a link in the chat section where you can learn a little bit more about that. So I'll just check in. I don't think I see any other questions posted today. I think a testament to how well our presenters provided a great overview of the Getting to Outcomes model. And thank you very much to Matthew for posting your contact information. I'm sure that will be greatly appreciated and by our attendees. So if they do have any further questions, we do invite you to throw us an email if you want us to share anything with our presenters today. And with that, I just wanted to wrap up, and I'll pass it to our presenters if they have any final comments today.
No, I mean, I just very appreciative of the offer to come and talk to the users of the Methods and Tools website, and it's just an honor to be a part of this collection of information. So we're just really pleased to be able to talk to you about GTO, and again, you know, send us an email, give us a call. We're always happy to talk to folks about GTO.
And this is Jamie, and if I could just quickly add on to the question about capacity, and the answer that Matt provided is certainly absolutely true. And the other thing I would say about GTO is capacity comes fairly early in that process. So you go through fit, and you think you've got what's going to work, and you move on to capacity, and maybe at capacity you find out that it might not be the best for you, and so you can bump back to fit and give it another go. And I think that's part of the beauty of GTO, is that you can sort of go back and tweak and revisit where you need to, and then continue to move through that process. So for me, a process is the be-all, end-all. You know where you're going, and you know where you've been. And so I just wanted to add that little bit of comment to that question.
That's great, Jamie. Thank you very much. And it was interesting to see how sort of the comments that you had about capacity and ability for the program that you were implementing. So that was really helpful. And definitely important to consider how it's sort of an ongoing, continuous cycle within the model itself is definitely helpful to realize as well. So with that, just a few notes that we've actually already had from our attendees, thanking our presenters for the wonderful presentation, and those who have found it very informative. I know I certainly have found it informative. So with that said, I'd like to give a final, again, thank you to both of our presenters. It's a real honor to have both of you present on the model and the application in practice. So with that, thank you very much, and we wish everyone a great afternoon.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.